Hey guys, we've got Lee Leebold with us here today. Lee, how are you?
I am great. Thank you, Brandon. And how are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Uh,
Lee has a bit of history with Squadron. He worked there for a while, and now today is the owner of the original Squadron artwork that is still left in existence. And he's got quite a bit of things to tell us about. So let's jump right into it. Lee, when did you work at Squadron?
I was in Squadron from 1989 to 1995.
Okay.
And that, some people say that was one of the heydays. And when I say heyday, I was fortunate in not, that was the time of the first Desert Storm, okay, the first Gulf War and everything. And it caught everybody by surprise. We couldn't do anything wrong back then, and so it was a great time to be there. We led the way during that squadron led the way during that period of that first Desert Storm, but that was back in the late '80s, early '90s. I
Right.
I then left them to be a manufacturer's rep in the hobby business, representing all the different model companies and Hasagawa, DML. I represented them all at one point.
Right. Well, so that's interesting, and you're right. Through the Gulf War time there were so many new model kits coming out. Things that we have available now were just starting to be available at that time. Talking about the real vehicles and whatnot, but you said Squadron could do no wrong, so it seemed through those years, because everybody was interested in building models of the military vehicles that were being used at the time. So that's very interesting. Back us up a little bit before that. What got you to the point of coming to work at Squadron?
So I started in the hobby business in 1979, and I worked for a company at the time called United Model Distributors. And they were a general hobby distributor that at the time they were the largest in the country. I covered the state of Arizona, and for 10 years I sold all the different shops there. I was very fortunate that I had a empty territory when I went in there. And so I was able to get business going. And out of 65 salesmen, my first year I was rookie of the year. And my first full year, I was the number one salesman. So I enjoyed the company. It was a great company, but the opportunity came to be a sales manager and a buyer. And that's what happened when I came to Squadron.
I see.
And when I say squadron, it was really I was the military model distributor
Yep.
part of the company.
Yeah, MMD.
Right.
I got you. So because of all this, obviously you knew Jerry Campbell,
I
who
knew
is,
Jerry.
of course, passed away now. Uh, but tell us a little bit about, meeting Jerry, because everybody knows Jerry's the guy that started Squadron and started MMD, but he's not here today to talk with us about these things. So tell us a little bit about him and working for him.
Yeah, sure. It's funny because I started working for United Model because my father also worked for United Model. And when I started to work for Jerry, and my dad ran the United Model in Detroit, Michigan, is where Squadron started.
Okay.
Okay. And when I started there, Jerry was getting ready to move, and it was going to be the company was going to be run, even though Jerry owned it, by Chuck Aransky. And Jerry happened to be there, and he said he pulled me aside. He said, when I was first starting out in Detroit, and I'd gone down to United Models warehouse. And talked with your father. Your father said that I was never going to make it in business. And so Jerry all the time reminded me what my father had said to him. And I think it was because Jerry was doing it everything differently. What Squadron did, they did it their way, and they changed the way the modeling business was in this country. But Jerry was quite a guy. He did it his way, and but he created a very successful company, and you know, I'm seeing that you guys are really bringing back that original legacy of the company, which is really nice to see.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you saying that. Now, we're looking at all this artwork that Dan is walking around and showing us. Some of these, the Squadron Signal publications, started up shortly after the business started as a whole in 1968. And some of those earliest books, if I remember correctly, Jerry actually wrote himself.
Yes.
So obviously, this artwork is a big part of these books because they needed a nice cover for the book. So, how did all this get started? Jerry did the first one himself, but then, fast forward a few years, you've got hundreds of books, you've got Don Greer, and you've got these other artists that are doing all these things. So, give us a little backstory of how all of this came to be.
Sure. Well, Don Greer was secondary when Jerry started this. He started in Detroit. It was the Squadron shop, and he actually started making little lead figures. And Dan, can you go over there? And there's a pile of artwork if you can pick off. They started making these Squadron figures, lead figures, and this is the artwork that was used for the original artwork. That one right there that Dan's looking at is by Ron Volstadt, who went on to do Osprey. He did a lot of the box art for DML. He did a lot of things.
Okay.
Um, then besides Volstadt, they had Angus McBride, who was very early and became world famous in the sense that he did tons of the Osprey books, but he also did not Lord of the Rings. He did a lot of early not science fiction, fantasy stuff
Okay.
also. So a lot of the things that they did in the early days were before they started making books, and these artists were all doing it out of the Squadron shop in Detroit at that time. Uh, Don Greer, who was at that time working also in Detroit, was working for AMT.
Okay.
And he did a lot of the box art. He did a ton of the box art for AMT. He did some when AMT did a thing with Frog. He did some of that. But Don, over the years, did artwork for just about every model company. But it was 1972 when he first started to participate in books. And before Don, the earliest author was Uwe Weiss, the German author. And Uwe was literally writing books in Germany, and then they started to collaborate, Greer and Feist, and so all the early German books. This is artwork from some of the original Uwe Weiss books, and they didn't have backgrounds. It wasn't until a little later that they started to put backgrounds into the artwork and everything.
Yeah, I remember those first books were just a white background
Yeah.
like that.
And if you look there, you see some brown tags and everything on there. That was used by the printer for alignment and color adjustments and everything else when this went to the printer. So the author would write the book. The book would be submitted to Squadron, where our we had all sorts of editors, a couple different editors at the time who would edit the book. Then Greer would get with the artist and they would start doing the artwork. Now, Greer didn't do the entire artwork in a book. He did usually the front cover, he did the back cover, and then he did some of the profiles in the center page. But Squadron at the time had 12 people in the art department, and it was a really ongoing project. And there were times where they printed up to 4 books, maybe even 6 books a month. So they were moving at a high pace.
Yeah, I say so. All right, so Lee, that's pretty interesting how all that works. So once Don came on the scene, and I mentioned Don mostly because perhaps he's the most famous artist for Squadron. Certainly not the only one, but you see his name on the front covers more times than not. Uh, but after he came on the scene, there were still other artists involved. You said there were, a group of about a dozen artists doing other things throughout these books. And I guess it really takes that if you're knocking out 4, 5, or 6 books a month, you got to have a lot of people doing a lot of things.
Right,
I mean,
right.
how long did they keep this up? This 4+ books a month?
Well, I can tell you during the time period I was there, that was pretty normal that they were pumping books up. But it was also a very prosperous time for the company. And so, besides Don Greer, the second most uh, artist who did the most art was Lou Drendel. Lou
Yep.
Drendel, who was a pilot himself and everything, did a lot of the modern aircraft. Just to give you an idea, Squadron did a book on by Lou Drendel of his artwork.
Right.
So they never did a book of Greer's artwork, but they did a book of, because he was an outside artist.
Okay.
And so this is one of the ones in the book. So again, this was the cover of the book, The Art of
Okay.
Lou Drendel. And we got a picture of that particular painting, which I have
Nice.
sitting over there. Something I did want to mention, all the paintings that are framed that I have hanging on the walls, all those originally hung in the offices at Squadron Signal in Carrollton.
Okay.
And at some point, this happened after I left. They had this framed up. They had about 100 pieces framed up and put it throughout their entire office area and everything. And so those 4 paintings, 3 paintings of the 4 that Dan has up there, were actually covers for the catalog, the quarterly catalog. Those are original pieces of art done by Uwe Weist, which was some of the early color background art that he did after, the more plain ones.
Right.
And those date back to 72, 73. So we're looking at 52, 53-year-old artwork right there.
Hmm. Wow.
Some of this artwork literally goes back as early, I believe, as 1968. So,
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's it's very interesting that these all are still around because and correct me if I'm wrong here, Lee, but Squadron and MMD before now never they never sold any of this artwork. Is
no,
that correct?
correct. This artwork was literally stored away for close to 50 years. Now, at one point, Jerry Campbell decided to take some of the artwork and put it and store it in a barn. And that artwork didn't last and is no longer available. Nobody knows what happened to it other than the original Perry Manley, who was the art director, said it was lost from mold and
Mm,
everything else. Everything we have here is in excellent condition for 50-year-old art.
right. It's very interesting seeing these because you know you have the inaction book or whatever kind of book it is, in action or on deck or walk around. You know, they had several different types of books through the years. But when you see the book, the printed book, it looks nice, but it's nothing compared to seeing the original painting. The colors just pop on those paintings in person. I mean, even looking at the pictures in the background of your video now, seeing them through a screen do not do those paintings justice. So it's just really, really nice having these here in person for sure.
Well, Greer did several different types of artwork. He was a gouache painter, which was using water and pigments and everything, which was a large amount of his artwork. He did airbrushing. He did um, um, basic pen drawing. He even got in the towards the end of his career. He got into digital artwork and
Mm,
everything. So he kind of did everything. He even to the day, and he passed away a few years ago. But even to the day that he had passed away, he was still doing artwork. He was doing artwork for Atlantis models up
okay.
until the very end. And over a probably 60-year period, Greer probably was the most influential aviation artist for the model industry.
Hmm.
He was the first one to produce books for the modeler. Not he, but Squadron was the first to
Right.
produce these books, and it made a difference in the way guys were modeling. Not only did they get a history, but they got the details of what these aircraft looked up close. You didn't have, you didn't necessarily have the ability to go see a Corsair up front, but by getting their book on the Corsair, you were able to see the detail, get the history, and then see all the markings. And in the profile page where they show you, 10 or 12 profiles of the same plane, but with different markings and everything. It was really, they were the first in the hobby industry to really do that. Now, we know there's lots of other guys doing that now, but Greer was very instrumental in starting that trend with Squadron.
Okay. Now, you talked about Greer doing things for Atlantis most recently. Uh, I assume that through the years that he was an in-house, guy at Squadron, his artwork was only at Squadron. Was there ever a time where he left or he was doing freelance things? Can you
He,
see his
he
artwork anywhere else?
He started in 1968, and left in 2015.
Okay.
And during that time, he was still doing for all the different companies something here and there. Okay. From Monogram, Revell, again, AMT, Eschi, MPC, you can name it. He did artwork for these different companies. And like I say, up to the very end, he was still doing. He wanted to keep working, and but we lost him in 2021, I believe, or 22, and it was a great loss.
Hmm. Well, you mentioned Lou Drindle and the books there. Yep. Now, did Lou? I've seen his name on a few other books.
He
Did
published
he?
some of his own books
I
also.
was going to say I thought that he was an author as well as the artist.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, all the books that he did the artwork for, he was the author. He
Okay.
didn't do any artwork for anybody else other than his own books.
Okay. And I thought that was the case. So that's very interesting. Were there any other Squadron authors or artists that were there any other authors that were the artist like that, or is he the guy?
There were a couple who did a book here and a book there, and I
Yeah.
can't give you any names right off the top of my head.
Right.
But the three main ones who did more than probably anyone else is Greer, Feist, and Drendel. Though you did have these other authors who did submit some of their own artwork.
Sure. Yep. And as far as authors go, of course, there were quite a number of authors
Oh yeah,
uh, that did books that, of course, one of these three guys would have done the artwork for.
right.
Uh,
Right.
so, if you had to just guess, and I say guess because I know you don't know exactly,
Oh,
how
by the
many?
way, Brandon, wait.
Yeah.
See something on there?
Oh, I see it. I figured I'd be hitting you up for those after this is done.
Those were from the other half of the page of the big one that you got.
Yep. Oh yeah, yeah. We're getting that guy framed too. It's a pretty cool
That
piece.
was the largest single piece of art they ever made because it stretched the length of two profile pages.
Wow. Well, it's very nice. So, but anyway, so how many paintings do you think that you have still? And of course, guys, keep in mind that Lee has been selling these for the past couple of years. Um, but how much of this stuff do you think is still there at your place that's available?
I would say, from if not even from what I had, but if you took from the entirety, even the stuff that was lost, I'd say we're sitting with about 60% of the artwork. We're
Okay.
probably sitting with another seven to 800 paintings, and that doesn't include the profiles and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
So that's
That's
one of the early ones right there that Dan's showing, and there's the P40 book
okay.
that piece of artwork went with.
Yeah,
So,
that looks nice.
but here's one of the. I've got the painting back there somewhere, but this Dan did the not Dan. Excuse me. Don
Don.
did the artwork for Check Model for this particular kit and several of their kits.
Okay.
He did all the Encore models also, which was their own company back
Right.
then.
Yep. Hmm. Yeah, that's nice. All right. So you gave us a little background of how the books got started, but one thing that you mentioned that by the time you got there in 89 and then in the early 90s, that was kind of the heyday, as you referred to it as,
Mhm.
for books, 4, 5, 6 books a month. But this is close to 20 years after the company started by the time you got there. So I guess through the 70s and through the early and mid 80s, I guess they just continued to pick up speed and start making more and more books. Uh, so by the time you got there, I guess when you came in, it was all hands on deck making books.
Oh, it was full speed ahead. I mean, I came in at the most perfect time because, like I said, you just said they'd been around for like 15, 16, or 20 years already, and they had a lot of things totally worked out. I
Right.
mean, from customer service for the company, had one of the finest customer service departments, and they always took care of the customer. The customer was the most important part of the picture. And but coming into the first Gulf War, and it was at a time when model companies were producing kits right off the wall. I mean, a lot of those companies are long gone now. I mean, it was a period. Hobbycraft Models, if you remember them, they'd come out with a P40. Well, they'd introduce 12 versions of that P40. You know, at one time. That's how many kits were coming to the market. It was just crazy at that time.
Wow.
The modeler had a lot to choose from. Maybe not necessarily the quality of the stuff that you got today, but there was a lot of model kits out there to choose from. And that's when people like Walmart was still carrying models. Okay,
Right.
they were getting people interested into the industry, into the hobby. I meant
Into
to
the
say,
hobby, yeah.
into the hobby.
Well, it the time that you were there is very interesting to me too because you said you were there until 95.
Yes.
Okay, so that was literally just a couple of years before Squadron launched their first website. And in most cases, before anybody launched their first website. So this little transition period, of course, I was what, 10 years old, 12 years old. So I don't know any of this. I don't remember any of this.
And you
Uh,
just aged me. Thank you very much.
well, that's fine. The interesting thing for me during that time is in around 97 or 98. I've told this story. My uncle asked me if I would like to learn how to sell on the internet with him, and my response was yes. What's the internet? And that's literally all I've done my whole life now at this point is e-commerce, as it's called. But for you, how did this change your industry? Because you said when you left Squadron, you continued to be a sales rep for these manufacturers. I mean, you're making 6 books a month, you're selling stuff, you're doing the good old fashioned mail order. Your role with MMD is you're putting these books and these model kits in these hobby stores. How big of a change was this? And of course, it took it a few years, but give it 5 to 10 years, all of a sudden the internet has really taken over what the business model was when you were there in the early 90s. So tell us a little bit about this transition through those years.
Well, first of all, and I saw this all through that, first before the internet, we had the video game era in the 80s, and that
Okay.
put a little bit of damper on modelers and everything. But today, there are as many hobby shops in the United States as there were hobby distributors back then.
Okay.
So that's how many shops we've lost, and basically the day of the distributor is gone.
Right.
Okay, and like you say, the internet is that it made a big difference because what happened is it changed the way people were going to be buying model kits and everything.
Right.
Um, you're right. They were the first on the internet, but before the internet, they had the catalog
Right.
for 20 years previously. And I don't know, even today, when I received your catalog, that's something, that sits on my coffee table there. And I use it as a reference. But back then, their catalog, their monthly flyers, all that were like gold because when a
Right.
guy got that, so come a Friday afternoon once a month, the company would shut down. There were over 112 employees at our peak, I think. We'd shut down and people would be labeling the flyers to send out.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
And, hopefully that following week, our bank of mail order phones were, we weren't taking a whole lot of stuff online. It wasn't until later
Right.
that happened, but it really has made a difference in the industry itself from back then because you don't have as many shops as you used to back then, and but that's good for you.
Well, it is. That's obviously how I make my living. But at the same point in time, being a hobby guy, you know, it's interesting because everything that I like is from the '80s. It's weird. All my hobbies are '80s themed, and we can throw model kits right on along in there because a lot of guys consider the '80s to be the heyday of models. You said it yourself. So it's in some ways it's kind of sad because Of course, I've got my own hobby shop. I get to go there every day. But even when I'm traveling and I'm out of town, if I run across a hobby store, I love going in there because seeing this stuff, shopping in person, is there's just something special about that. So, you being with MMD and dealing with all those stores back in the '90s, uh, like you said, there was a lot more of them back then, and uh, I can imagine your job, making sure these guys have the latest and the greatest, because again, this is a time before the internet. Unless you told your hobby store about the new kit or the new book or the new whatever, they might not even know about it.
That's right. That's right. And that's why, again, the flyer was so
Yep.
important, from for the mail order customer, and that, right now you get the click of a button and you can have all your customers right there at your
Right.
beckoning. So
Yep. That's true. Now, what about any of the big hobby shows that they used to have? Did you ever get to go to any of those?
I attended every hobby show from 1979 till they stopped. Well, I'd go to the one in Vegas. They'd have, and these were trade shows and everything. But at back in the day, the big one was always in Chicago. It was at the Rosemont Convention Center there, and they would pack that place. And
Right.
today, you just don't have those shows. You got a very small show in Vegas. Now, for the consumer, we've got the IPMS national
Right.
shows and things like that. And, those are still, I think, going well.
They are, and I look forward to those every year. Usually, I get to see you there. Will I see you this year?
Where is it this year?
Hampton Roads, Virginia.
Okay, well, save me a few tables in your booth and I'll be there.
All right.
And I'll
I
pay for them.
I'm sure we can work that
But I'd
out for
want to be
sure.
part of your booth if I'm going to any of these anymore.
You might as well. We got plenty of space, so that'll be great. Um, well, tell us something else, Lee. Give us. You got all this artwork in here. Tell us a story or two about these. Anything interesting to you that I might not even know to
Sure.
ask about?
Well, first of all, I'm going to step back. This was a article written in one of the trade magazines in 1992, I believe.
Okay.
And if you look right there, that was me half my life ago. I'm 71 now. I was
Okay.
36 when I was working at Squadron.
Okay.
And so they came, they did a story on us. Here's a picture that we did in the parking lot with all the employees. And it was featured in Hobby Merchandiser magazine back in 92, I believe it was.
Okay.
Also, another thing, this is a Korean hobby magazine.
All right.
And at the time, we had a Korean gentleman, Mr. Joe was his name, who was working for us, had come directly from Korea. His father was a South Korean general in their army. And they did a story on us. Now, I don't read Korean, but this is it. And again, there I am half my life ago. This is Mr. Joe. This is Perry Manley, who is the art director. This is Don Greer. This is Scott Battistoni, who started the all the resin products and everything, and a guy by the name of Mike Bobby, who was our mail order manager at the time.
Okay.
But the one of the interesting things was is that people didn't leave that place. People came and they worked there for a long time. As a matter of fact, a lot of the staff who worked in the back were over 60 years old and everything, and they did a great job and everything.
Wow.
Uh, I want to show you another. I'm going to get out of my seat
Yeah.
for a second and show you another unique piece of art. So you've probably seen this famous photograph. This is a painting Greer did of the famous photograph, and it's of the XB-35 flying over the Capitol. But I've yet to find, and maybe somebody out there knows what this artwork was done for. I've yet to find a model kit or a book where
Huh.
it's referenced, but it's really a beautiful, unique piece and everything,
Yeah, it is.
Kind of rare too.
and rare because it again.
Yeah.
So
Makes you wonder what they were, if it was for a project that never happened, it makes you wonder what was the project going to be.
exactly, and as a matter of fact, when you say that, there are probably about a dozen pieces that I have in the back that I've never been able to identify a book that it came from. It's a Greer piece of art signed by him,
Or a model kit.
or a model kit. And again, um, you know,
Wow.
and an interesting question is, I said, Greer signed a lot of his work,
Right.
and he didn't sign certain things. And I said to him when I had dinner with him several months before he died, I said, "How come you didn't sign all your artwork?" And he said, "If I thought about it, I signed it. If I didn't think about it, I didn't sign it and stuff." But
Okay.
what's interesting is once they got into the digital era of this, we found that he would do the painting, digital painting, send it in, and then when the book was produced, he might have had missed something, and they added it in at the printer, certain pieces of artwork or something.
Okay.
So it wasn't always when he sent it out, it wasn't totally finished at
I
times.
see.
So, and Greer, not only besides doing the airplanes and the armor and the ships and that, one of his early books from the 1980s
I
was
was
called Down
just
in the
Yep.
Dungeon.
I was just about to ask you about this one.
Okay, and Down in the Dungeon was about the time when TSR was doing Dungeons and Dragons, and out of the blue, Squadron decided they were going to do this book. It is all paintings, it's all Greer paintings of fantasy art.
Hmm.
Um, we ended up selling all that artwork of the fantasy stuff at Heritage Auctions at a worldwide auction, and some of those pieces brought $3,000 to $4,000 just for these little fantasy art and everything.
Wow.
Now I do have one piece.
One book.
I have one piece left of that, and that is why the book had its issues.
Really?
Greer copied or did a painting that was looked just like a Boris Vallejo. And when they went to print it, there were some contesting and everything. And the book, that piece of artwork had to be left out of the book and stuff. And I looked for it this morning to see if I could show you in that. Squadron also did a book on fire, a couple different books on fire trucks
Yep.
and
The fire
everything.
trucks.
We have that artwork too that's never been offered before to anybody. Uh,
Speaking of fire trucks, talking about aircraft, they weren't all military aircraft either. Did
no,
some airliners.
that's true. That's true. As a matter of fact, we just sold that one
Yep.
to that customer and
Yep. And
stuff.
he got it, and he's very happy with it, by the
Okay,
way.
excellent, excellent. Um, I think one of the things that with the people who worked at Squadron, the bulk of the management were, I shouldn't say the bulk of the management. We had a lot of very intense modelers who were on the staff. I didn't happen to be one of those. Okay, but we had guys that literally, if you ever visited them in Carrollton, you walk into the main lobby, and we had all these beautiful showcases with kits that different employees had built over time and everything that were really nice.
Hmm.
Um, well, I grew up in the industry. I wasn't really a modeler, but growing up, and even when I was at MMD, because we were required to build something when we were at MMD Squadron.
Okay.
So I was the type of guy that would go to the defective pile, and I would pull pieces from this kit and pieces from that kit. And I would kind of kit bash my own little
Yep.
contraption and everything, because to me, instructions were destructions. And so, somebody who's slightly dyslexic like myself, that was the only way I could model.
Hey, you know, that's like my two boys. They both like Legos. One of them likes building out of the box. The other one likes getting a bunch of stuff and coming up with something.
Right.
So,
Well, you know what? And Legos. This is one of the things I spoke several times to the industry at a couple of the trade shows, and that was one of the things that I said is the Lego builder is our customer when they start to grow up. Now, some people will
yep.
never leave Lego, but you got to get them started somewhere. And so back in the day when I was sitting with the president of Monogram telling him, hey, we need more snap tights back then to
Right.
create new modelers, because we want that first model they build to be successful for them to come back and do something else. And
Right.
again, a place like Walmart had snap tights and all that. Well, they had no selection. So if the kid liked it, he'd have to find a hobby shop
Yep.
to grow the hobby.
Exactly.
So it all came together, but unfortunately, people like Walmart don't carry models anymore, and none of the big stores really carry it anymore. But that
Well,
helped grow the industry in the day.
yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that. I've been doing this now for just about 20 years, and just in my time, I've heard it since I started. We got to get the kids into the hobby. I'm sure that they were always saying that during your time in the industry, and I'm sure they were saying it to the guys in the industry before you. But the good thing is that's been for me 20 years, for you more. The industry is still here.
Right.
So, it may not be, when you go down to the IPMS show and, there's usually a couple of kids in the junior category, but overall, they must be out there somewhere because the industry is still here. Um, those companies like Monogram, they're still doing those snap kits. They're still producing them, still making them. So I say this a lot, and I think it's true that it's a great time to be a modeler. Because I think at the beginning of this, you mentioned the quality of the kits that we have now, the selection that we have now. If you if you could take the quality and the selection that we've got now and take it back in time to the 80s and offer it to those guys that are unfortunately no longer with us, just imagine the smiles because it's just incredible what's coming out these days.
What I would say is, if all these IPMS clubs, modeling clubs that aren't related to IPMS, anything, I even saw it, especially in the radio control and train era, because I did everything that I sold, is if a kid would come to their meetings and stuff, greet them with welcome arms, teach them. But a lot of those clubs back then kind of pushed the kids to the side. I think, as to keep it going, we still need to dig a little deeper to get the kids and everything, because, like you say, eventually people are dying off.
Well, it's uh it's an interesting thing, but I guess for now we'll just be happy that there's so much selection coming out. Uh, at least in the kit form. The circling back around to your books. We talked about the internet changing how retail was done. But fast forward to now with digital books, that's really impacted what's printed. And you even mentioned that Don Greer, in the later part of his career, started switching over to digital artwork, and we've done a few books, and we will continue to do a few new books from time to time. Uh, Nothing like four a month, but uh, all of the artwork that we're doing now is done digitally. So that, Don, you mentioned he kind of got his feet wet in that, but that's kind of the go-to thing now, and
Right.
it is what it is. It's got a different feel to it. I really love these original paintings, uh, but it's it's got its place, and it's pretty amazing what these guys are able to do with this digital artwork these days.
Right. Well, like I say, we've got this artwork that has survived over some of it over 50 years and everything.
Yep.
Every one of these is just a little bit of modeling history uh, for because in its day, um, I can't remember the exact. They sold 20 or 30 million books. Maybe you can. Uh,
I'm sure I've got the record
I,
somewhere.
I
Yep.
think it's like in the new market, they sold over 20 or 30 million books worldwide. Now,
Right.
that doesn't include the aftermarket, the eBays, what the used books
Right.
on Amazon and everything. And so they were known across the world. When we would go to, every year, we would go to Germany to the Nuremberg Toy Fair. And we were doing that before the Iron Curtain even came down, and we would have, as a matter of fact, um, the Czech companies. What's the big?
Oh,
I'm brain dead here.
model kit companies like CMK and Special Hobby and those guys.
Yeah, and
Edward.
yeah, Edward. Okay, we were meeting with Edward back in the early '90s in Germany when they didn't even speak English, and so we'd have to have an interpreter in the booth to interpret this. And I mean, the squadron people were coming to that show and showing up at our booth from every part of the world. And we at one point even sponsored a. This is when Zvezda, and I don't know if Zvezda is still around or not, but we brought a Russian businessman over here for 3 months who was a former KGB agent, uh, and he spent some time with us here back in '93, '94. So
Now,
we,
you're
we
talking
were,
about the worldwide market and specifically the Russian market. I just remembered this. Th- Some, and I don't know how many, maybe you do, of the Squadron books, the inaction books, were translated in Russian and offered over there.
as a matter of fact, somewhere I have some of the. I still have some of those books that are in Russian, and
Okay.
I want to say they were armor books, but I do have some.
Right.
And if anybody's interested, we can offer those up. I was going to say if anybody is looking for any sort of squadron art, whether it's a front cover or a back cover or even some of the profile art. Now, not all the profile art survived, but just take a picture of the artwork, put the book number down there and what it is, and submit it to you, Brandon, and we'll see if we can find it
Yeah,
for them.
absolutely. Yeah, these certainly make an excellent addition to any modeling room, to have this hanging on your wall.
Well, sometimes at the shows, people come up to me and they go, well, I don't have any room for our work. And I tell them, well, you got a garage, don't you?
Yeah.
You got a bathroom, don't you? And if your wife is really understanding, what about on that ceiling above your bed?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. You can put it
So
anywhere.
there's always room for squadron art, and I guarantee you that we have a few customers that we've sold art to that they could start their own Greer museum already.
Yep. Yeah, the gentleman that we were talking about that bought that airliner recently, uh, I can't remember if it was him or the guy before. We've got one guy that's just been, he's bought two or three or four of them so far. So once you get one, you get hooked. So
Yeah.
I guess be careful.
Now, and somebody was asking me not too long ago, how do we come up with the prices? Well, first of all, I want to say we are going to be offering some great promotions starting when this publishes. Uh, but pricing is based on the popularity of the plane, the popularity of the book. Somebody goes, well, why is this one this and this one that? Well, one might be a Piper Cub and the other might be a Corsair.
Yep.
Okay, both same size paintings, but it's based on the popularity of the plane and the book and the subject matter of whether it's a in flight or it's a walk around type of thing. So there's
Front
all
cover
sorts of,
versus back cover.
pardon,
Front
or
cover
back
versus
cover.
back
Yeah,
cover. Yep.
absolutely. Though there are a few back covers that have been gorgeous and have sold for quite a few
Oh,
bucks.
sure. Well, and the main thing to remember too is they're one of a kind. There is only one. So if it's something that you want, you can't wait till the next one comes out. They quit making these a few years ago.
Right, right. Yeah.
All
So
right. Well, Lee, is there anything else you want to add to this before we get out of here?
I just want to say thank you to all the people who have supported you and in turn have supported us. And like I say, I have to say, you are living up to the legacy that Squadron Jerry Campbell started. And when I see everything you're going above and beyond with some of the stuff. Now, the technologies have changed and stuff, but I have to say that watching your enthusiasm and just how you do everything, Brandon, I'm proud of you and thank you for all you do.
Well, I appreciate that, Lee. You're too kind, and we will continue to carry on and do the best that we can. And as I always say, we continue to have a lot of fun over here. So, well, I appreciate you being here with me today, Lee, and thank you for showing us all this artwork. And hopefully, we'll get some of this artwork put into some of these modelers' houses before too long. So,
All right.
we'll see you on here sometime in the future again, Lee. I hope.
All right, Brandon. Thank you very much. Take care, buddy.
You too. Thank you.
Bye bye.